Jim Dickmeyer is a North American Competitiveness Fellow and a diplomat in residence with the Wilson Center's Canada and Mexico Institutes. He's also detailed to the Center from the U.S. Department of State. That sounds cool, being detailed, doesn't it?
It does. It's a lot of fun.
Well, Jim, what happened? Campaign rhetoric was directed south of the border as far as trade criticisms and NAFTA criticisms, and everything went peachy when Trudeau and Trump sat down together. But then suddenly we see headlines saying, is there going to be a U.S.-Canadian trade war? What went wrong?
Well, I don't think anything went wrong. It's timing. This softwood lumber issue has been around.
This is the Wilbur Ross announcement about a tariff.
A tariff on, and the issue is some of the complaints from U.S. industry that there are unfair subsidies through the system that Canada uses to grant access to public lands for lumber companies up there. This has been going on since the 80s, and so there have been various stages. I think in 2006 was the fourth kind of agreement that was reached. There's agreement, and then they put a time frame on it to see if they need to adjust the agreement. And so we're at that point. And so everyone knew this was coming 10 years ago. So it is something that's played into, I think, the broader rhetoric, as you say, coming out of the campaign. NAFTA was being questioned, the whole North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. Trade is on the agenda. In my time in 33 years in kind of public service and kind of talking about America overseas, I've never seen such questioning of kind of the value of trade. There's always been issues about certain dislocations and so on. So all this kind of combined with this one issue, then also the visit to Wisconsin and the dairy issue, which is another one.
Well, tell us about the dairy issue. So this is accusations from U.S. farmers about predatory pricing from Canada?
Well, what it is, no, it's more of how they allocate market share within the Canadian marketplace, and so they have what they call a I can't remember the term of art, but what it is for the dairy industry. There are certain quotas that are allocated amongst various farmers in various provinces and so on. It keeps the price artificially high for Canadians for milk and cheese and so on, but it assures the dairy industry. They've had this for grains in the past. That's no longer in existence. And I think the key thing to remember of this was under the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partner Program, the treaty that was done with countries in Asia in which Canada and Mexico were also involved. Canada was required, Canada agreed to put this on the negotiating table, and in fact that was going to go away under TPP. So that particular irritant was negotiated in a trade agreement that hasn't, of course, been
But it's
approved.
not a violation of NAFTA, the existing trade agreement.
Correct, not. There's not much, agriculture is one of those issues within NAFTA that's probably had more of the kinds of questions of trade disputes. We certainly had it most recently with the labeling, the cool. So that's an area that gets a lot, but it isn't as, I think, strictly defined in certain elements and chapters of NAFTA.
What about the notion of subsidizing the lumber industry? Is that in violation of NAFTA? How should we view that?
Again, because this has such a length of decades of dispute, there have been times when Canada has gone to both the World Trade Organization and to the NAFTA dispute boards. There have been different interpretations in terms of whether this is an unfair subsidy. In the end, it's been negotiated away. One very interesting thing, John, is what's happening in the world anyway is there are now big Canadian lumber companies that have more mills in the United States than they have in Canada. So in essence, what you're having now is the relationship is much more that globalized relationship. There's less of a kind of national element to it. But what drives the Canadian government to defend its timber industry are many small lumber yards and facilities that are family owned and so on. So there would be a significant loss of jobs for them, they believe, if this were to change.
Stepping back from some of these specific issues, could you paint a picture for us of the big picture, the level of trade, the level of commerce, the level of interdependence between these two countries?
So a good one is like softwood lumber. In essence, the bilateral annual trade of softwood lumber is equivalent of 5 days of our 365 days of trade. So it isn't insignificant, and it's certainly significant to those folks who would be dislocated if, in certain changes, but it's not a big part of our trade. It's important to the U.S. industry for the supply. Our housing industry depends a lot on that supply from Canada. And so housing prices may go up in the United States if these tariffs are eventually applied. There's a hearing period going on right now, so they haven't yet been applied. Our houses may go up a bit because prices may go up a bit on softwood lumber that is used in the housing. But the big picture, I'm glad you asked me that, because what we really have is an amazing opportunity in the North American production platform. Auto companies have taken advantage of it. Aviation companies have taken advantage of it. So you're now we're producing autos together. Almost every world automobile company is based somewhere in North America, and probably in all three countries with an integrated supply chain. We're making these cars together to be competitive in the world. We're making airplanes together to be competitive in the world. We need to work on those kinds of things that will help us be more competitive in all of that kind of collaboration. Some people use the word integration, there's some of that, but it's really, we're still three sovereign countries. So some of this is still difficult because you're talking about border issues and other kinds of things, but we've resolved a lot of it. And there are processes out there that allow us regulatory reforms and regulatory harmonization. It can help a lot. Why should a child seat be different in Canada than the United States? They're both safe. But the manufacturer has to make two different versions. So if you solve that, you're getting more competitive.
So the process of production is somewhat seamless, but the politics and the regulatory picture is not.
It's right. And you still have, on the supply chains, you still have borders, and you still have some issues there. But again, those are being worked on diligently.
Is there any sense within the industry or the specialized area of expertise that these relationships are somehow taken for granted, that because these are peaceful neighbors and we don't really have issues on the North American continent of the same type that exist elsewhere, that somehow we take these really beneficial relationships for granted?
Yeah, I think so. And you'll I heard a Mexican diplomat say recently, normally in a presidential process in the first 100 days, Canada and Mexico get an initial visit, often from usually the first overseas visits, and then they're off the screen. They're not off the screen this year. And, he said, be careful what you wish for. But the point is that it's not bad to have NAFTA back on the screen. A lot of people have talked about the need to renew it, to renovate it, to make it more modern and include some of the things that weren't included 24 years ago.
Well, the multi-billion-dollar question, the future of NAFTA. What do you see happening both in the short term and the long term?
I think it'll be medium term because I think everyone's signaled now that they're ready to come to the table. President had chats with both the Prime Minister of Canada and President of Mexico. They're ready to come to the table. My hope, having served in both countries and really believing in kind of the North America competitiveness agenda, is that they approach it in a let's make it better, as opposed to let's think of it as a zero-sum game and see who can get another advantage over somebody, or let's think, brinkmanship and tear it up. Going at it positively, as we basically have done in the 24 years of it, is the way to go.
Jim, thanks for joining us. From a lay position, I have to say, it seems like there is huge potential here that politics is getting in the way of.
Right, and I think
for this North American juggernaut.
It's funny. NAFTA has been, a whipping boy since Ross Perot, even Barack Obama, campaigned on changing NAFTA, improving it. That gets back to the whole kind of symbolism of trade being, negative. Yes, what we have to look at are people who've been affected and how can we help them. But basically, trade is primarily, if pure trade is nothing more than supply finding markets wanting a certain supply. And so in the end, it's a consumer-driven kind of event. Trade agreements help level the playing field for everybody in that natural process that's going to happen in world trade anyway.
Well, Jim, thanks very much for joining us. This is an ongoing discussion, so we hope to welcome you back in the near future.
I would enjoy that, John. Thanks.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.